Imagine a sitting prime minister being on the payroll of the United States Central Intelligence Agency at the time when he was championing third world causes and non-aligned causes. That could qualify as treason for me. That could be treasonous. But nobody answers this question. So that's the only thing I'll say about that, because really, we've seen a party that grasped at straws. Everything they're trying to make an issue of. So I hope that when they go to complain to the international community again, they can take along their ownership documents for the property in Lethem, and they should take along the Auditor General's report. And when they sit in the Public Accounts Committee, they must say to the accounting officers, you must go after everyone else who are in state property except the PNC. Except the PNC. And by the way, if they want a piece of land in Lethem to build their office, they're free to apply. The government will favorably consider it. So if they want to build their offices, wherever they want to build their offices, that doesn't bother the People's Progressive Party. I want to talk a bit about the visit to India, the official visit to India. As you know, it followed a visit from the President and some very intensive discussions that he had with the leadership of the Indian government. And so in my visit, I was there mainly to speak at, I was invited to speak at the World Sustainable Development Summit. But the trip was converted into an official one. So at the summit, if you follow the news, I spoke extensively about Guyana and its approach on the forest sector and how we're utilizing those resources, or how we intend to utilize those resources to tackle the issue of adaptation and also livelihoods in the indigenous communities. However, the conference, since it dealt with sustainability, I think in many parts of the world, when you attend these conferences, people speak about sustainability in terms of approaches and preservation of ecosystems. So how are you utilizing natural resources in a manner that 50 years from now, they will remain in a form that is not a depleting form? And how do you utilize the benefits from those resources to transform people's lives? Or that is the approach. Or can we have a sustainable ecosystem, a forestry ecosystem, ensure that our waterways and water resources remain intact, etc. But at the conference, I sought to deal with the sustainability from the perspective of the justice issues in the climate discussions. And I argued basically that for some countries, it's not a question of sustainability in ecosystems. It's a sustainability of the countries themselves. And if we don't tackle the sustainability of the countries themselves, we could never have a conversation about ecosystems or sustainable approaches. And that's a big gap. So we're often prone to look at the micro without looking at the macro. And for a large group of countries around the world, in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, in Africa, the question now is, can these countries be sustainable as countries themselves? And I pointed out that it goes beyond just climate issues. If you look at the region, say CARICOM, a single catastrophic event, a hurricane wiping out the equivalent of 50 years of accumulated wealth in a country, national wealth, in gross domestic product, in a single event in 2 hours. And without any funds now in the global community to assist these countries to adapt to climate change or to minimize, if not, you can't prevent these events because they're already, the concentration of greenhouse gases is such that it would cause these events, and it's getting worse. We can't avoid these events happening because of the current concentration of greenhouse gases. So the only way to address them is to adapt to the challenges and to minimize the impact of this. And they don't have the resources to do that. They're debt stressed, fiscally stressed, and many of them rely on a single sector that often faces a whole heap of phytosanitary restrictions or trade restrictions in their exports. And so unless we tackle that issue early, these countries don't have sustainable medium-term pathways. They'll keep losing welfare, they'll keep losing a lot of the capital formation that they've built up for many years, and they may become failed states. And it's a real challenge. And so in Guyana's case, we are not waiting with bated breath on funds for loss and damage or adaptation, because those countries are waiting. They go to every climate negotiation and make the case, and they come back empty-handed. And the clock is ticking for some of them. So in our case, money earned through the forestry sector and from the oil and gas industry has to go, or would go towards climate proofing our economy and safeguarding our people. And that means billions of dollars on managing water, protecting our coastal zone, moving to crops that are climate resilient. Since we can't stop these events, we need to now adapt to them. And this is where I pointed out. So all of these conferences we're holding on sustainable water systems and sustainable forestry systems, they sometimes miss sight of the bigger picture for many of these countries, that the countries themselves can be sustainable. And though that was basically some of the tenure of the debate that we're embarked upon now. I also, so after Terry, there were lots of other meetings on the sidelines where we dealt with some of these issues. And then I met with the Indian government. So I've seen a lot has been written about the MOU that we intend to sign with the Indian government in the oil and gas sector. So the MOU will deal with a number of issues. The MOU will deal with exploring the possibility of trading in crude oil, that is sale of crude oil. But we agreed with the minister that this has to be beneficial to both countries and it has to follow market conditions. There is no agreement to sell any oil to India at this point in time. And any such agreement in the future will have to be competitive and will have to benefit both parties. Secondly, it deals with strengthening our regulatory capacity and sharing expertise in building capacity in the staff of the Ministry of Natural Resources. India has an enormous capacity in many areas, and we hope to benefit from the strengthening of the regulatory regime, their expertise in strengthening the regulatory regime here for the oil and gas sector, as well as building capacity in the Ministry of Natural Resources. It speaks about the collaboration in the future for the natural gas. So we are, as you know, we're embarked upon the gas to energy project that will utilize some of the natural gas that is produced or they've discovered offshore. We're now pushing Exxon to complete the gas utilization plan. We hope this will be completed very soon, and we are working on our own gas strategy. We're going to get some of the consultants from India and other places to work with us on having a national gas strategy, which will determine what we do with the gas that has been found offshore so far. So it then deals with potential areas for bilateral cooperation in exploration and developing our resources. So as you know, we started this off by saying that we were exploring whether we would utilize all the areas offshore through a national oil company, or we will go to auction. We decided at this stage we are not going to establish a national oil company, and we went out to auction for 14 areas. There are several areas remaining offshore that were not auctioned or not part of the current auction. Those areas will be available for bilateral engagements. We then have sometime next year the relinquishment of 20% of the Stabroek block, and those areas would be available also for bilateral, and possibly if the bilateral agreements don't yield the results that we hope they would yield, they would also be available for auction. So we have made no definitive decision on the 20% being relinquished, that those would be all available for bilateral engagements or auction, although they're potentially available for the discussions at the bilateral level, and that is what we spoke of in India, and we have also indicated that to several other governments that are interested in participating at a bilateral level with us, because we believe that some bilateral engagements could complement the more commercial type engagements with the private sector that we're getting through the auctions. So that there be no agreement on any bilateral engagement with any government so far. All of the areas are available, but it would depend on the terms of the bilateral engagement, and those are not up for discussion as yet. We're only discussing with India, as we've done with so many others, a framework agreement that will be signed. The framework agreement will say we will cooperate in all of these areas, but when you come to discussing specific initiatives, for example, if they want to buy crude, then they will make a specific offer, and we will then assess that offer on its merit in accordance with the principles that I outlined before. And similarly, if they want to engage in a bilateral discussion on exploration and development, a specific proposal will be made, and that will be done. So there's no such agreement. We're dealing with a framework agreement. There are a few other areas in the MOU, and I suspect that once it's signed, it will be in the public domain because it's a general MOU. We also, in India, we met with, I saw a number of people saying, oh, we're buying boats and aircrafts from India. We have made it clear this was somehow in India. There's a feeling that we're buying these for military purposes, and I had to make the point that in Guyana's case, we're exploring the purchase of these vessels as well as the aircrafts for civilian purposes, that we're not fighting war with our neighbors, that there are the vessels would allow us to exercise greater sovereignty over our exclusive economic zone. We now need vessels that would allow us to tackle illegal fishing, probably tackle drug trafficking offshore, better police our waters, and then that the aircrafts we're looking for are basically to allow us to better service the hinterland community, including if the freight costs are too high for goods and services to many of these remote areas, and which pushes up the cost of living, to use those to ferry freight from the city into these remote communities at a rate that is lower than some of the exorbitant rates charged by some private operators. And that's where, so they're exploring the aircrafts, and some of the aircrafts that they have now that's being used in the Indian military, they're suited for that purpose. We sought to get something similar to the Skyvan, but you know those were discontinued, the production of those. So we're told that these can operate on short runways, and they can carry a lot of cargo. So just to put at rest this so-called, we have not purchased anything as yet. We're exploring the purchase of these. We're looking at the specifications, the pricing, and of course, assessing these in relation to other offers that we have on the table. You've had issues where at one stage someone said we'd lose our civil airworthiness basically because of this, buying these aircrafts, and I think that issue has been settled definitively by the Civil Aviation Authority. They made a statement on these issues, that these would not affect our overall standing because there's some procedures for certifying aircrafts of that type. But we have not made no decision at this point in time. We're just exploring these. We look at markets competitively. That's one thing about this government. We're not just going to go and buy something just like that. We are exploring everything else. We have just explored and got some quotation for solar units. A 1 megawatt unit in India could cost maybe 50% of what we're paying for a similar 1 megawatt unit through a competitive bidding process now. 50% of it for the solar. And by the way, the MOU also the MOU is not on crude, it's on energy, because the MOU covers renewable energy too, and it covers also solar energy. So it is not just about oil and gas, the first MOU that I spoke of. We met also in the agricultural sector, and we are looking as consistent with the plan to look at higher levels of productivity in the agricultural sector at this point in time, in every industry, and to move from a peasant-type farming into agribusiness. We need the expertise from many parts of the world to transform these industries into agribusiness and with higher levels of productivity. In India, the variety of cane will give you probably 2 to 3 times the output that we're getting from a single acre of cane here. Similarly, the rice varieties yield much more. They're really great at some things like nano fertilizer, so we explore the use of nano fertilizer. We're told that 2 pounds of nano fertilizer can be as effective as, say, about 4 to 5 pounds of regular urea if you use nano fertilizer. Tissue culture, we're going to be working with India and expanding the tissue culture facility we have here in a major way. When we look at our nurseries now, they're anemic. They can't they can't supply the planting material that we need at scale and the quality through the current method. And so with tissue culture, you can do millions of plants in a short period of time, but everyone having the same consistency and productivity as the other one because of tissue culture. So we're going to be working with India to bring in these facilities here. It would be a big, huge opportunity for Guyanese to work in these areas. It will be a big boost to say, our cane farming industry. We need planting material now of a high quality. We can get 1 million plants in a short period of time. And also everything else, almost any tree that's grown, you can culture it through tissue culture in the lab and then produce plants of high quality. We're looking at that in aquaculture, in the spices, in the livestock development, a whole range, coconut growing. We're thinking about putting large swathes of land that the state has along the banks of the river, especially areas that are prone to flooding on the coconut cultivation, but we need to get better quality material. They brought in some from Brazil. So India is a powerhouse in agriculture research and development. They practically feed 1.4 billion people themselves with very little import and with high levels of productivity. We're looking at biogas and biofuels. And so we spent a lot of time at a very practical level so we are hoping over the next few months that a lot of these specialists would be recruited and brought to Guyana to give a big boost to the agriculture sector and expand its productivity. We met with the Minister of Health. We are looking to India again. As you know, we're building 12 new hospitals this year. We have to get the people to manage these hospitals and to staff them. India can help in this regard to not only supply people, but also train a lot of Guyanese at the requisite level to man these hospitals that we would have. We probably need 1,500 to 2,000 people, new healthcare professionals in 2.5 years once these hospitals are completed. We need a more, 1 million, 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 1 the electronic technical way of managing these hospitals through patient record systems, which means implementing new systems for the entire country. So India has done this well in many areas and cheaply compared to many of the proposals that we're getting that are commercial in nature. So we're hoping that they would assist in these areas too. So I'm going on for a while, but the trip was a more at a practical steps to implement these now, and that is what we're doing. India is, I don't think I need to speak about India's capability. India would become soon the third largest economy in the world, and it has a great capacity there. I'm going to stop there because I just wanted to bring people up to date. I've had tons of calls about the trip, and I wanted to do this quick press conference to ensure that people, I didn't have to speak to reporters individually. There have been a lot of misrepresentation in the media about what the trip was about, and I hope I've corrected some of those. Thank you. Yes, please. No, I can't give you a date. It's before the Cabinet of India. It has to go to the Cabinet of India, and then once it receives their approval, that would be signed. But the Foreign Minister of India, I don't know if that's in the public domain already, will be visiting, I hope I didn't, will be visiting Guyana. Yes. Yes, please. Yes, go on.
On the sustainability front, did Ghana commit to sharing our model you heard it right?
Yes, about Guyana, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
did Ghana commit to sharing our model of dealing with sustainability to those vulnerable countries who may have to address the macro before looking at the micro?
Sure. We have worked. There's a working group now, a high-level working group. I don't want to speak about it as yet because it will be announced soon. That would look at forestry issues in a major way to ensure that they get their appropriate expression in the COP negotiations and to highlight the role that forests can play. But in our case, we have worked already with countries in Africa. I've met when this was since when I was president and just after. They asked me, when the African leaders met with countries in the three forest basins, they asked me to be the roving ambassador. So I've met with places like Congo, the president of Congo, that is Brazzaville. And we have shared already, we have a good working relationship with them. What we are doing there, we sent many of our people there, they sent some of their staff here. We're looking to expand that. In India, I met with the Minister of Environment from Sri Lanka, and he wanted to find out more about this. And I promised to send one of our staff at the technical level to Sri Lanka to brief them about how we went about doing this. I suspect particularly in Africa, because we've already had some requests, and we're looking to to collaborate. You know, Gabon is also one of those countries that have been in the forefront of the fight. I remember working with President Bongo a long time back to give forests the greater profile around forests. He is still pushing that in Africa. So we are committed to sharing all that we have done. We made that offer some time ago to Suriname. I went there, I met with them. The offer is open. We said the same thing to Belize when the Prime Minister was here. I met with him when he was passing through here. So we're open to sharing everything that we've done with all the countries that need that help.
The national gas strategy, is there a timeline for this? Would it come on stream before the project is finished?
I can't give you a timeline now, but we're working on it. But before the end of this year, before the end of this year, we will have that strategy in place.
And on the agriculture front,
but that doesn't mean, because sometimes people confuse that. They say, how do you don't have a national gas strategy, but you're pursuing the gas to energy project. So that is clearly defined. What we're going to use the gas for there has been defined already, the 50 million cubic. We said to Exxon, the pipeline that we're paying for already will have, and that is feasible in itself, will have the capacity to bring in more gas. That we have to start the discussions very early about utilizing the pipeline to the full capacity. So that means maybe another 70 to 80 million cubic feet of cubic meter of gas every day. How do we use that? That is what we're discussing now. There's been a lot of, we went out already to expression of interest, and a lot of interest has been expressed as to how to utilize the gas. Would it be fertilizer, basalt plant, etc. So we are moving ahead faster on that bit. The national gas strategy is the fines. We've had some fines that Plumer, which is mainly gas, and some of the other areas in the southern part of the Stabroek Block. And then we have this associated gas. Exxon had argued at the beginning that they need all of the associated gas pumped back into the wells to keep the quality of the wells up. We have a different view on this matter. We have a different view on this matter. So that is why the gas utilization plan has to be done, and we are working on our gas strategy. And the discussions have to take place about how we monetize the gas there. The gas that are associated gas, and we made it clear, if they're not going to utilize it, like Plumer, they'd have to relinquish it. And we may find other people who are prepared to utilize the gas. And I'm saying this openly. We said it before. So that is what we're working on, to define the bigger strategy for the gas industry.
Okay, yes. My final question. For the agricultural relations, what is India's take in this regard? They're sharing so much with us, going to help us to mass produce ramp up production. What are we giving India in return?
No, some of this we're buying the specialists, but they come cheaper from India and from some other countries than from, yes, the Western countries. And they're high quality specialists, people who have done this before. So they come in, they walk straight into the field. They walk into the research body and start doing work. We don't want the consultant type writing, the report writing consultants to come here. We want people who have actually gone and established a biodiesel facility, who have established it and can work come here and now say, here are the things you now need to do to establish a biofuel facility or an ethanol facility.
Good afternoon, Vice President.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Dr. Ashni Singh announced a few months ago 3 more gold companies larger than OMA is coming here. Can you say if they have arrived, what concessions or lands were granted to them, and if you'll make that contract available to the public?
Yes, so...
Can I ask 2
Yeah, so that's one question. Yeah, just ask all the questions now,
Okay.
because today I don't have much time for dialogue. I have to go to
Would
Burpees.
Would you be capping the interest rates on the investments of the current, and kindly say what's the rate we are paying at the moment on the 40 billion Exxon's investments out there? Would you ring fence this 5th project before approving it? Ring fencing the decommissioning
A lot of
costs.
these questions were asked and answered before.
No,
I'm not going to go back over issues. So give me,
right.
so are we ring fencing?
Decommissioning-
I answered that the last time, and I said to you, I used the pluck chicken analogy, and obviously you don't understand it up to now. So I'm
Decommissioning
not going to
costs.
waste my time today answering everything and presenting a platform for GAF here. So ask me the questions and let me answer. The answer is no to that one right away. I've answered that already.
Decommissioning costs,
Right.
currently in the hundreds of US
Yeah,
millions.
you asked that too already.
That's finished.
Yes, so you asked that question, we dealt with it already.
Guyana and the region not fully protected from an oil spill on to this day. What do you say to the people of this region?
Yeah, so, all right. So you have 6 questions there.
No, I only asked 4 questions.
All right, 4 questions, and I'll answer the 4 questions. So the first thing is that we believe, based on the existing arrangements in place, that we have a capability to deal with the oil spill now. We've evolved the contracts, and this capacity has to grow. And by the way, I forgot that we're bringing some specialists from India too to work in the EPA in precisely this area that we spoke about. We met with the people. They're going to come in to strengthen that department. So we have moved from an earlier license that is an environmental permit that had very little provisions for any of these things. So let me go back again for the umpteenth time. The EPA permits that we have issued for the licenses that we have issued since we got into office, they have included treatment of wastewater up to an international standard before discharge, and progressively that standard increases. Many countries in the world, in the developed world, discharge the water just like that into the Atlantic. They don't have standards like us here. They discharge the water in the same Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. We have higher standards than many of these countries. We have a no flaring policy, no flaring policy. So I saw some international group talking about be careful about flaring in the future ones. The policy is no flaring beyond the commissioning period. Beyond the commissioning period, no flaring. So that's the policy. If you flare beyond the commissioning period, the period authorized by the EPA to flare, you pay a fine that is based on carbon emission. Very few countries in the world now have that. The oil and gas companies in the early permit never had a cradle-to-grave responsibility for cradle-to-grave management of waste. They leave these in many countries when they go, or leave it with their subcontractors. We have agreed to all of this. In the last one, we decided that something that Exxon didn't want to do all along, that to bring in the capping stock in the country, to have one of those based in the country. So they said it's too costly to bring it here. It costs tens of millions of dollars. In the last permit, they have to have one in the country, and two, a subscription to an international company that can supply capping stock, so in case you have a spill. Very few countries in this region have that. So those are progressive measures to deal with any possibility if you have a spill, should you have a spill. But why this crocodile tears now? What about 100 years ago? Where were you when Trinidad was producing oil, pumping oil all the time? Were you worried about Trinidad having adequate measures? What if they have a spill in Trinidad or in there, and it comes along our coast? For 100 years, Trinidad has been producing gas and oil too, smaller quantities, and nobody suddenly were worried about that. Suddenly Guyana. In Guyana's case, we have dealt with all of this convenient, the convenient higher than thou, holier than thou, high horse attitude. It's pure nonsense, utter nonsense. Because if our standards are higher than many countries in the world that are producing oil and gas now, including some in the US. So maybe you should take up the case with some of those countries too. On the interest rates and the other stuff that you mentioned, the answer is they're all part of the Starbrook block. We made it clear. Those arrangements, the president pointed out, there would be no renegotiation. He explained why, of the Starbrook block. We have effectively, I saw Kaichor News conveniently again played something that I said. The context was that we were concerned about the renegotiation, the ring fencing and everything else. I've expressed concern from day one about that. But we made it clear in opposition. I can find you a tape in opposition weeks before the election. We were not convenient. Weeks before the elections, I will find you a recording at a press conference when I was asked definitively weeks before the election, and we said no. We didn't change the position. So we talk about contracts before. We have effectively renegotiated 9 of those contracts, 9 of the 10 contracts, by changing the terms of the PSA, because they all have to now comply. There were 10 of them, including the Kaichor and Kanji and all of them. They now have to comply with the new terms of the PSA, which is a 10% royalty, 10% tax, 65% for cost recovery. That's what has been done. Effectively renegotiated. So you chose a part and you didn't see contracts. I said contract. You said Jagdeo promised to renegotiate Exxon contract. I never said that. I spoke about the contracts, that these contracts will have to come into compliance. I was speaking about generally, and then when asked specifically about the Exxon one, I said no. But you clip little pieces, and it goes down well for the fantasy land that you live in. But it's not fact. It's not fact. We've been consistent throughout. We're wanting you not fine. You're not going to lead us by the nose. You can lead Norton and Ramjatan and get them to say what do you want, because they don't have a clue about what's going on. Imagine Norton talking about, and Ramjatan expressing shock now and surprise about some of the things that he was at the center of defending when they were in office. They got defending. And Norton talking about ring fencing, but he's very, very, if you listen to him, I don't know really if he supports or he doesn't support. I think it's largely because he wants to sit on the fence, please the extreme now, and then still maintain some modicum of credibility if he has any. So I think these questions are answered. I'm now using this forum. I've been very tolerant at press conferences. I've given you a lot of time, but I'm not going to belabor points every time answering the same question over and over. There hasn't been a new issue in the Kaichor news for the last several years. Not a single new issue. It's the same thing regurgitating every day and just conveniently drawing and misrepresenting international reports. Total misrepresentation. Taking little bits out of them and conveniently building a story about them. No credibility whatsoever. So today, it's a busy day for me. Maybe another day I'll be tolerant. I got to go to Borbies. Yes,
Sir, the question I asked had nothing
answered.
to do with
give
renegotiation.
Give the gentleman their thing.
The insurance I asked has nothing to do with
insurance. I told you the EPA, they have to get the parent company guarantee. I have expressed concerns myself. If you think you're just concerned, we are building capacity in these sectors. Some of the concerns are also our concern. The parent guarantee should have been done already.
That's what we want to hear.
The parent should have been done already.
Okay.
It has to be done soon. We told the EPA, give this Exxon a deadline. Give them a deadline for doing this. It should have been done. That one, you're right on. It should have been done.
Capping the interest rate has nothing to do with renegotiation of the
Please
contract.
give the gentleman. I answer the other questions. All right.
Samuel Signander, NCN News. Mr. Vice President, over 10 persons have been charged by the police for the unrest at the Monrepo market, the incident in June last year. Mm-hmm. The PNCR issued a statement calling for the government to drop the charges. Your thoughts? How do you respond to this?
Well, the PNC love PPP supporters. I think the PNC really like our people, because when this happened, they said all the people who committed these acts were PPP plants. That we planted those people to commit the illegality. So suddenly now they want the charges dropped on these people who were charged. Now, clearly, it might have been APNU who planted these individuals. We're always going to be supportive of peaceful protests. In any democracy, you have to be tolerant of protests. You have to guarantee people's right to express themselves openly, even in opposition to the government. Now, clearly, the people of Golden Grove, they had cause for concern, because I am personally horrified about what happened to that young man there. It is unacceptable what happened to him. So clearly the people had cause to express concern. But expression of concern has to be done peacefully. They could have protested peacefully. But when these elements join the protests and they engage in terrorism and terroristic activities in relation to other people, destroying their livelihoods, beating them up, then the state has to intervene and come down with the full force of the law on those individuals. Not peaceful protesters. There were many peaceful protesters. So those people will never, if the signal is clear to them, they will never again, the troublemakers and those who are extreme in nature, they will understand that that behavior would not be tolerant in a democracy. So that is these people must face the law. You have a right to protest, but you don't have a right to destroy and to harm other people.
Just a second question.
But the same APNO, very convenient. What else you expect from them?
Just a second question. Sections of society have been calling for the indigenous communities not to accept the carbon credit payment of 15%. Do you think this is justified or adequate for these communities?
Oh, I saw some organizations, a known individual who has been one of those who've been always against our LCDS. Now people hail the 2009 LCDS as sector leading and one of the first in the world. The world is going that route now, what we did in 2009. And some of these same people were opposed to it. The Bulkans and the others, the Janet Bulkans and the others, the APA. And you recall them writing Norway to block our funds. Go down that list of people who wrote Norway. That's the group that I'm talking about, that resurrects themselves in different clothing. They always surface in a different guise now. They always surface, and they're surfacing again. The fossils of the past, the Heinz and these groups. So imagine that person who lives abroad says the indigenous leaders are complicit with the government. 242 communities that got over $22.5 million US dollars now sitting in their bank account that they can spend for the development of their villages through an involved and a consultative process with the people who live in those communities. They have to give the approval to how to utilize the resources. That those people are complicit with us in committing an illegality. That person lives abroad. So she's not even indigenous, but can lecture the 242 elected leaders about what they should do and what they shouldn't do. But then they will go and shout, you need FPIC, free prior informed consent, but they can speak on behalf of indigenous people. The same thing with the APA here. The APA gets funds from the international community not to help the villages, but to fund its own activities and to block these initiatives. They will not find a single cent to put in these communities, but they're negative all the time. So we have to forge ahead. These leaders came here, they were elected by their people, they represented them. Some of these communities, if you look on average, I saw Kite Shore News again, put that of the $700 and something million, 22.5 million will be given to the people. 22.5 of the $700 million. And it's a lie. And it was front page headline. It's 22.5 million of the 150 million that we received this year alone. If you look at the 700 million, they will get 112, 113 million US dollars. That is what is equivalent to 15%. But the biggest headline is basically Amerindians given a pittance, 22.5 million of the 700 million. It's a blatant lie. It helps to feed this thing, this sort of thing. Total lie. And it's supported by the newspaper, basically. So those NGOs, they would go on and lament. Yes.
Good day, Vishani. We're
Yes,
from the
go on.
newsroom. 3 questions from me. The first one, during your visit in India, did either India or Indian companies say they will be participating in the auction this year? Secondly, there was some talks about a vaccine manufacturing plant or a hub of some sort. How have those talks advanced with both India and Rwanda? And finally, the concerns about foreign currency shortages, is that engaging your attention, and what can be done about that?
Sure. So on the health sector, yes, there's been discussion about that. I saw Leslie Ramsamy mention it, and it's clearly this has been an old issue here about the safety of our people. And given what happened in the pandemic, we have been exploring the possibility of regional security with vaccines. And so there was discussion with the Indian government about the possibility of producing some vaccines here in Guyana. So those discussions will continue at the government level and at the company level. So we believe we can make progress on it, but it's early stages, very early stages. But the idea is to ensure that we have security in the future, because you saw what happened in the pandemic. We could not get supplies for our people in this part of the world. Africa faced a similar problem. That's why there's a discussion with Rwanda to do the same thing. We can't rely on the developed world in the future to supply these. So that's the first issue. The second one about India again, what is it?
The ongoing auction, India or
Oh,
Indian
yes,
companies
the auction.
participating?
So we, I know there are a number of companies that have registered already. I don't think there is any company from India that has been registered for the auction. So but we raised the possibility, because our job is to market the auction to ensure as many people as possible put in tenders. Because the more tenders we get, it would be better for us as a country. Remember, there is a minimum price you have to pay and all of that. We're hoping the auction would be fully subscribed. But we didn't discuss anything. That's a commercial sort of thing. We discussed mainly bilateral engagements through the MOU, but not directly with the companies. Although we expressed a desire, as we have done with everyone else, and openly even at the energy conference here, that we would like to see more people participate in the auction. I'm going to the Sarah Week next week in Houston, so we will again probably encourage people to participate in the auction. On the issue of foreign currency, clearly we have the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. They have a job in our economy from a macroeconomic perspective. Often at the level of the enterprise and at the chamber level, their view may not take into account the macro picture. But it doesn't mean that the government has to pander to that, although it has to be aware of what's going on in the markets. Now, clearly, you've seen the central bank's response yesterday. The central bank has a role of promoting price stability. It has a role of controlling the money supply. It has to ensure that the money supply, along with the fiscal policy, that they are conducive to growth, and that they, in the long run, they don't cause, particularly now, given that we have oil and gas proceeds flowing into the economy, that they do not cause us to suffer the dreaded Dutch disease. So, if you talk to manufacturers and the people in agriculture and the exporters, they don't want the exchange rate to appreciate. Because if the exchange rate appreciates, it would kill those export industries, kill them, as has happened in many countries in the world. So eventually the economy starts relying only on the oil and gas related industries. And that's proven economics. The importers, and many are in the chamber, they prefer a rate, a US dollar rate that is appreciating. So they pay less Guyana dollars for the exchange for the US dollar. And often, when we look at it, it's not passed on in final prices. So what they finally get, because they get exchange rate that is cheaper, or foreign currency that is cheaper, they end up with bigger margins. So you'd often have a conflict between the objectives of the two sectors. But the government has to ensure that aggregate demand and aggregate supply in the markets, that they tend to reach some equilibrium given the objectives that I just mentioned of the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. And when we look at the market, you always have seasonal variations. So you have periods like in the Christmas season, some people come in, you have more foreign currency, and then you have periods of low, and then periods where you have more supply to the market. When they look at the market itself, the market in aggregate is clearing. But as I explained sometime before, that you have not one market, not an aggregate market, but every cambio in this country operates like a mini market within the aggregate market. So it truncates the supply and demand for currency. So one bank that Exxon was selling to one bank, Scotia Bank, and they would have an abundance of supply, but maybe some other bank may not have the same amount of currency at that same time. But if you had an interbank market and they share, or people don't keep money only for their customers, like some of the banks do, then people would be able to go to another bank and clear and get their currency. So we have to now work at promoting greater exchanges. So I think we've been exploring something. I was thinking about this, and I have to discuss it with the finance minister, that maybe we need a daily balance reported to the central bank of currencies purchased and sold, and the daily balance at all the institutions, and then the list of demand. And you will see in most cases that they're clear, but it's just that they exist in different institutions. So if I'm banking with GBTI or Bank X, let me don't use a bank, I'm banking with Bank X. My bank, I go to them for foreign currency. They may not have at this moment, but another bank has excess. So that's what we need to do. That is why the ministry, the central bank said the conversation that they should have is between the chamber and the private sector commission and the bankers association and the others to have the market work more efficiently, not necessarily with the government. But we can't be pandering every time the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce wants to issue a statement. We can't be pandering to that. We have to look at the macroeconomic objective. And those are the same people sometimes who will come and talk about Dutch disease. Oh, you have to avoid the Dutch disease. You have to avoid the Dutch disease. So we have a firm view on the objectives, what the macroeconomic objectives are. And if we believe that there is a sustained shortage, we have the means to supply the market. We have the means to supply the market. But we don't want to supply the market and so that the rate appreciates, so a few people can get cheaper foreign currency. We can't do that. It will go against the macroeconomic objective.
Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned a number of companies already registered for the auction. Can you perhaps say how many and perhaps where they're
Get
from?
that from Vikram Bharrat.
Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo. Kiana Wilbur, Kaichur News. Just a few questions.
Yes.
I want to go back to your statement on the MOU with India. Can you explain for us what are some of the benefits government is hoping to achieve by having a pool of offshore blocks available for bilateral relations? What is government hoping to achieve with that compared to the commercial type auction that you have ongoing? That's the first question.
And this is not just with India, with all the bilaterals. So we believe that beyond the regime, the new regime in the PSA, that this could probably, if we work at the bilateral level, the returns could be, because there'd be some ownership now. So we may very well go to an ownership structure. You'd be part of the ownership of the blocks. So they'll be owned between the bilaterals. So you share, you get the taxes and the royalties, because by virtue of them operating in the sector, so these companies will have to still comply with the fiscal regime, but then you get some of the proceeds distributed to, that is from the profits made by virtue of ownership. So that is what we have to explore.
Okay. And secondly, with regard to the audits of the ExxonMobil costs, can you say what system or mechanism government will use to address any discovery of inflated costs? How do you intend to disincentivize that type of practice?
Yeah, so the audit has been submitted and it's been sent to Exxon. Now they have 2 months to respond and on all our findings. And then you'll have a rework here and we say, we agree with your explanations, because like in any audit, you have to send it. They have to give explanations as to all the findings. And then once that's done, we can say, we accept or we don't accept. So if there is a dispute, there is a dispute resolution arrangement there. So let us await that. Let us await their response. But it's an area that we have to pay a lot of attention to, and that is why it's so crucial that we build the capacity locally, because a lot of the international audit firms also work for the oil majors. And so it's important that we have localized, well-trained localized, to also do the audits, to do these audits in the future. Like we've done here, we have a combination of local companies and an international company working together. So we're hoping we can expand that.
Okay, just to follow up on that, could you say if government is thinking along the lines of penalties in the event that inflated costs
if it's disallowed, then you disallow. So if we disallow the expense, it has to be removed from the cost bank.
Right.
If we disallow it, so it has to be removed from the cost bank.
Okay. And thirdly, with regard to some of the statements government receives from ExxonMobil in terms of cost recovery as well as the forecast of expenditure for a given quarter, can you say if government is interested in releasing some of these documents so that we can see the rate at which some of the costs are being retired?
Yeah, sure. But let me tell you something. The thing in this environment, if a lot of this is proprietary, but in this environment with an organization like the Kaichur News, I will never want to release that, because they will nitpick. It's a nitpicking. They will take one word out of it and create a story and lie about it. That, I'm not saying that personally. Please don't take it personal. But this is what it's about. Every little thing. There are some standard practices in the industry, like around the world. In no country in the world, you will find that intermediate reports being released all the time to the media. You show me a country that's been doing this, and I'll say, okay, and where oil operations are, and we will do it. But they don't have a media house like Kaichor News, frankly speaking, that would lie. You know, look at every single thing. Every single thing. We've released all of the reports, the environmental permit. APNU didn't put those on their website, the two that they issue. I ordered that they put all of them on their website. Not as one day Kaichor News shown the difference, the qualitative difference, and how the permits of today are more akin to the global standards than when they started. But they will still get the man who signed the earlier permits to be the specialist, Vincent Adams. He is the specialist on Kaichor News and will talk about all of these conveniently, how you must do permits today. But he signed on to the two that were so mediocre that they should really, we had to change their terms now. We had to change their terms. That is what we're faced with. When I say, I did some interviews, clearly, if the Kaichor News was interested in and there's a role for media to hold government to account, and also the oil and gas companies, the serious account on these issues, because sometimes you do have lapses and you need to get that done. But you can't be a campaign of lie and be so duplicitous. You have the man who signed the crappy permits being the specialist and speaking about the permits that are akin to international standards. Where is the credibility? So that is what I'm talking about. Release of information is not for the purpose of an analysis here. It's for the purpose of misrepresentation. They just want it for that purpose. Misrepresentation. That is the dilemma we face. But let's see if we can, we'll explore all of it. We'll be open to looking at everything and seeing what more could be done. On the EITI issues, we're looking at some of these issues, exactly that too. What could be released and what is proprietary. Well,
I just wanted to follow up on EITI.
Okay.
EITI GYUITI, sorry, has been suspended from the Norwegian-based EITI.
Yes, yes.
You know all about that issue. My thing is, one, why, or has government has an explanation to why the Minister of Natural Resources sought to have a one-on-one with the organization for an extension? And
I didn't get that. I think Vikram Bharrat, what he did, he spoke extensively, and he is directly involved. And he spoke extensively about his experience, what happened. So I would like to refer you back to what he said. But there are some crucial points that he made. He said he spoke with them. There's a go on. Sorry.
No, yeah. Before you go to that, because there is a guideline in the standards that a process has to be taken.
Yes.
They can't have that one-on-one. So why would he then seek that one-on-one? That's my question.
He sought,
one.
Yes.
And two, is there an explanation, or has there been an explanation from the head of GYEITI, Mr. Mizir, on his 4-month absence from the body?
Yeah. So first of all, on that matter, I think the minister had discussions. I think this is an ongoing thing. but clearly he recognized that we could not meet the deadline. And I think he sought to engage and ask for an extension, the head of the EITI. He explained that in his I think it was a TV program. I was abroad, but I look at the transcript, and I saw that he said, I knew we could not meet the deadline. I spoke with the gentleman. I thought we had an extension up to July, and we were working to get it done to July. Then, to my surprise, we got suspended now. And then he gave an explanation. He said, you know, we have been unable to do this because we had the international administrator, I think it's what it's called, but we couldn't clear the terms of reference. It's been sitting there for a while, that the meetings that were held all had to do with the head of the EITI Guyana, Premier, rather than the terms of reference, and that led to some of the delays. And then he pointed out to some of the people there. Now, when I spoke about people who have been blocking almost everything, almost like I believe they get paid internationally to block things, you see an example of that. What civil society, who does a Mike McCormack represent in civil society? On that body, we don't have the private sector commission. Now, the private sector commission and the labor movement are the two largest civil society bodies in any country, and they're not represented on this secretariat. But McCormack, McCormack has no organization practically, nothing. He is there, and he's one of the biggest humbugs, not only here, to everything under the sun. So the thing is that we need to call this out, because they masquerade again, like they've done in the past, as civil society organizations. So right now, from what I gather, it's that the work is ongoing. We're on track to submit the report by July, and the work is ongoing now. And you should talk to the minister about absent. I don't even know if that's true.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jagdeo. This is Davina with Kaiser News. Sir, on the government-to-government agreements for our oil blocks, can you say if they'll be subjected to the terms of the new PSA being drafted? And will there be signing bonuses? And you spoke about a framework that will govern...
It's an India thing? You just asked about India?
Not just on India. You spoke about other countries who are interested in our oil blocks. So I'm asking if they'll be subjected to the same terms of the new PSA, if they'll be signing bonuses. And you mentioned a framework to govern the exchange of crude.
But clearly, you can't understand the qualitative difference between governments working with governments than a commercial arrangement. That's what we said. I explained earlier about the PSA terms. But this is not for private purposes. This is government working directly with the government. So all of the proceeds will be shared, if we manage to get this off, between the two governments.
Sir, will that framework be made public then?
There is no framework at this point in time. What framework? What framework are you talking about? Which framework?
So
Which
you have
framework?
no plan as to how this thing is going to happen, but you're in...
No, but what framework? You just mentioned, what framework are you talking about?
You mentioned a framework to govern...
No, I'm talking about a framework agreement with India, covering renewable energy, covering fossil fuel, gas, covering technical assistance, exploring the sale of crude, covering investments. And I said there that this is just a framework agreement. What framework agreement you're talking about?
Okay, thank you very much for your response, sir. I would like to know, what I would like to know, let me rephrase my question if you did not get it the first time.
All right, but please don't go on too long. I got to go now. Yes.
I would like to know,
I have to be out of here in 5 minutes.
I would like to know how Guyana is going to benefit in those, in
I explained earlier that the question was asked, how is this better than, say, working through an auction? What's the difference between going to an auction and having a private company develop this versus a bilateral arrangement? So I anticipate that we will get, as I said before, the same sort of tax benefits that we're getting from the development. But in addition to that, we will become part owners. The country will become part owners of the development.
Thank you,
So
sir.
you then get revenue if it goes to a development as by virtue of ownership. And that will complement what you get from the taxes. That is how it works. That's why bilateral. And it's not going to be owned by any individual. It's owned between the companies.
Thank you, sir. On
Okay.
the gas to energy project, can you say what measures are being put in place for Guyana to repay the loans associated with developing the project?
I can't, you're reading too fast there. What's the question? Just explain it quickly. Yeah, one more
Okay.
question.
Can you say what measures are being put in place for Guyana to repay the loans associated with developing the gas to energy project, should it not be able to meet the financial requirements in an event, in an unfortunate event?
Oh, what unfortunate event you're talking about?
If there's an explosion and we are not able to, the plants are not being operational, how do we repay the expenses?
Can we get out of this morbidity? It's News are morbid. Imagine we must not build a power plant because we might have an explosion there. So let people
Sir,
don't
I
have
did not
power.
say that we should not build the power plant.
But the thing is that this is in effect what you're saying. Are you saying that which government starts off by anywhere in the world by saying that, oh, we're not going to pursue a development, or we're going to make mitigating plans to build, to pay back a facility if we have an explosion? Nobody builds a facility on the basis of that. Nobody builds a facility on the basis of a future explosion. We're building this gas to energy project, so upon its completion we'd have 300 megawatts of power that would allow us to cut electricity prices by 50% for the people of this country, that will bring stability to the grid, that would allow us to start exporting cooking gas so we can sell it for cheap, that would allow us also that based on the finances, the sale of the liquids alone, we can pay back the loan. From the sale of the liquids, pay back the loan, operate the plants, etc. So effectively, although I said it's 4 cents per kilowatt hour, you're having free power, because if you can pay back the infrastructure costs from the sale of the liquids and the gas is free, then effectively you're getting power for zero. But what if anything happens tomorrow? What if the existing power plant, we took a loan for what? Let me say something else. If we had a loan in GPL and the GPL blows up tomorrow, what are we going to do? We'd have to repay the loan through some other means, the existing means. You can't build these things. It's a morbid. You've run out of things on the gas to energy now. We gone to, what if it breaks up? What if it falls in the sea? What if the pipeline gets a little hole there? How can a government operate on what ifs? We're hoping that in these issues, nobody builds anything. Glenn Lyle would put up that big building that he complained about. What if it top story fall off? He got a loan in the bank. What if the whole foundation collapses? He has a loan. How would he repay the loan? He has to repay it from some other source.
Thank you very much, sir.
I can't understand this. When are we going to end with this morbid, sour kind of approach there all the time? Thank you. All right, I'll touch on it when I have time. I got to go to Borby's now.